probably, I don't think
Hello?
Yeah. Can you hear me if I don't use the mic?
Yeah. Better.
Awesome. Okay. Hi, how's it going?
Great.
So I got your official UniPro networking tip sheet. I love the first line. Always take initiative. Perfect time to ask for that cute girl's digits. It's good advice. How about you ask for a guy? I'm really happy to be here. I'm sorry I couldn't make it last year, and I should probably start with this. Can you guys give your hand? Give yourself a hand. Happen when people, especially your generation, get together and network and figure out how we can elevate the voices of Filipino Americans and have Filipino voices talking about issues that concern all Americans and figuring out how we can organize online and offline. So this is how shit happens. So I'm just really happy that you guys are doing this and I'm taking the initiative to do it. And it's only going to get bigger, it's only going to get better. So that's really amazing. And I'm really happy to see that. I was a reporter at the Washington Post for 5 years and in Washington, D.C. And it was really hard sometimes to see how and realize how invisible Filipinos and Filipino Americans are. Mostly invisible, I should say, because Ben Guzman has been fighting this for like a while. He's basically like the outreach of Filipinos. And we need more Ben Guzmans, and we need more people in DC that can really help elevate what we're trying to do. So thank you for that. The second thing is, I think it's really interesting, and I'm just going to keep it real, so I'm just going to talk about it. I think it's really interesting that you're calling it the Pilipino Renaissance, with a P. Instead of the F, the P. So I moved to this country from the Philippines when I was 12. I was born in Antipolo area, and then I went to Zambales, which is a province in the Philippines. I was there, I don't know, 5-6 years in the valley with Pasig. And then from there, when I was 12, I got moved here with a really, really thick Filipino accent. Like, kind of, you know, think of your moms and your uncles, like that was kind of my accent. And I remember when I first found out 4 years after arriving to this country that I was quote unquote illegal, which is a hideous term. When I found out that I was undocumented, I should kind of tell you this little anecdote. So I went to the DMV like any 16-year-old, and you know, because I gotta get my driver's permit, right? I didn't tell my lolo or my lola, I was nice. And the woman at the DMV looked at my green card and she said, she flipped it around and she said, "This is fake. Don't come back here again." That's how I found out. And then I remember writing, I'm like, my first instinct was like, oh, she's lying. Sure. And I remember riding my bike back home. And I lived in Mountain View, where Google was at, but I got to Google. So this was like 1996, right? 96, 97. So I was riding my bike, and then there was a Mexican supermarket. So I stopped the bike, I looked at the Mexican supermarket, and I'm like, whoa, maybe she thought I was Mexican. You're growing up in California. This was the Pete Wilson Proposition 187 era. When you grew up in the Bay Area, you only think that quote-unquote illegal people were Mexican. And my name is Jose Antonio Vargas. It's not like Manny Pacquiao or something, you know, or like, you know, Jennifer Balderrama or Matuyo or something like that, Filipino, right? It's Jose Antonio Vargas. So I was like, oh my God, maybe she thought I was Mexican. Because I was always going to ride my bike back to the woman and say, look, I'm like Filipino. But I didn't do that. I just went home and confronted. My lolo worked nights as a security guard, so he was always home in the afternoon. And I remember he was cutting grocery coupons in the garage. And I got back and I'm like, hey, can you tell me about this? And my lolo is like, you know, a proud guy. he said two things. One, what are you doing showing that to people? Two, you're not supposed to be here. So that's how my family decided to tell me. That no one told me this, not my mother, not my Lola, not my Lola. So the moment he said that, my first instinct, this is gonna sound really bad, but I'm just gonna be honest. My first instinct, I gotta get rid of this stupid Filipino accent. I have to get rid of it. I can't talk like my Lola and my Lola. Both of whom, by the way, have their papers. Because I know the way people look at them. I remember going to the supermarket with my grandmother and how she was so afraid. This is a woman who's an American citizen, paying taxes since she got to this country. This is a woman who was afraid to ask the white people at the supermarket for anything because her accent was too thick and she was afraid no one was going to understand her. You know this. And so I was like, I gotta get rid of that. Was my first instinct. And my first instinct was to learn how to pronounce F and H. So it's Filipino, it's not Filipino. I remember being in high school mortified when I said, in front of the class we had to read out loud, I said, the author said, the author. My choir teacher didn't want me who I love. I love Mrs. Denny. But I remember being in a competition with her, for singing, and she said, Jose, when we go to the word the, just mouth it. Because you could hear my voice saying da instead of the. So after that, and I love Mrs. Denny, she didn't say it to hurt me. She was just like, my voice stood out. And so I remember practicing in front of the mirror, literally, because she was like, put your tongue between your teeth. The. That's my Filipino experience, or what you want to call Filipino experience. So to me, and I've been asked here to talk about the Filipino Renaissance, which is such a, I love the idealism and the hopefulness in that. Because this is, most definitely, we are living through not just a Filipino Renaissance, but also an Asian American Renaissance, right? We, in the past decade, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are the highest proportion in population growth in the past decade, even more so than Hispanics in this country. In some instances, 200%, right? I've been back in places in the South, like in North Carolina, and in Alabama, and Georgia, that literally had 100%, if not 150% growth in the Asian population, because they just started showing up. But to me, the question now becomes, how do we get organized? How do we network? And how do we have a political voice? Because right now, and I'm speaking here in completely simplistic terms, we don't have that voice as loud as we should be having. How do we find the Jessica Sanchez and the Manny Pacquiaos of the political and social and entrepreneurial world? I think Nicole Fonseca is coming here from Maharlika. She's such a perfect example of the kind of people that we need to keep creating in our communities. And to me, what's interesting, and you've asked me to talk about the Filipino Renaissance, I am out, ever since I found out, as my grandfather said, that I wasn't supposed to be here, I've been fighting to be here. It's always been a fight. I thought I could just succeed my way if I wasn't privileged enough, because it isn't privileged to be born in this country, to be American. If I'm not privileged enough or have the luxury of being here with papers, maybe I can just, earn this thing. I thought that if I wrote enough articles, interviewed Beyonce, Newt Gingrich, Barack Obama, if I been published in the New Yorker, the Rolling Stone, cover presidential campaign for the Washington Post, I thought I could just succeed my way into it. But I couldn't anymore. I just couldn't. I could have, people, especially Filipino Americans, actually asked this question of, why didn't you just go home to the Philippines? You could have had such a better, you could have had such a big career in the Philippines being a journalist. First of all, I'm afraid I might get killed. The Philippines, is not a joke, is one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a journalist. What is a journalist really supposed to do? Tell the truth. And sometimes Filipinos don't want to hear the truth. By the way, that's what we call I mean, what do we call undocumented people in the Philippines? PNP. Tago ng tago. You're supposed to motherfucking hide. That's what you're supposed to do. We know that we have gay people all over the Philippines, but we don't even talk about gay rights. That's how we can have Manny Pacquiao, you know, smilingly say that of course he's not, I mean, by the way, all my props to Manny Pacquiao, right? I mean, the fact that he is fighting the way that he's fighting, he's representing us, the way he's representing us is a wonderful, wonderful thing. But I'm sorry, Mr. Pacquiao, you're living in the 19th century, my friend. How can we have somebody like Manny Pacquiao talk about women's rights and gay rights the way that he does? How is that acceptable? And what does this say to our generation? That's a big-ass question right there. And to me, as I've traveled around the country talking about defining America, what I've also discovered is we also need to define what a Filipino is. And our responsibilities individually and collectively to be a part of this community. How do we raise our political voices? How do we get registered? My biggest frustration as I've traveled around the country, I've done 60 events in 20 states in 11 months. My biggest frustration is meeting and going to speak to Filipino American groups and then asking people, are you registered to vote? Or American citizens? And they're like, really? Because look, being Filipino is more than liking and really craving adobo like I did. It's more than watching Balitang America and sending balikbayan boxes home, which I did. It's more than just enjoying, you know, what we do as Filipinos, because we are such a special, special people. We have a responsibility to each other. And we have a responsibility to be civic participants in this country. We have a responsibility to do that. And if your generation doesn't help us get our asses out, who the fuck is going to do it? I'm sorry for the language. I used to cover homicides. This is all cops. I covered homicides in Philadelphia for a summer. When I got back, my grandmother was like, why are you saying that word so much? I'm sorry, I was hanging out with cops, you know? But to kind of underline my point, if your generation doesn't stay as awake and as active for the rest of us, nobody else is going to do it. So we really need you. So, I want to take some questions, but before I do that, I want to tell you about two things. One is an organization I founded called Define American. Where's the mouse? Define American, which we launched last summer, which is going to go into a crazier mode in the next few weeks. I'm about to launch. I don't know if I wrote an article for the New York Times last summer, and I'm working right now on a piece of journalism that's going to be kind of even bigger than what I wrote last summer. It's going to come out in the next few weeks, so please check it out. And when that happens, we're going to, in some ways, do the second relaunch of Define American. So Define American, it's defineamerican.com, or also on Facebook. It's about changing how we talk about immigration in this country. And part of that, right, is to, in some ways, when people think illegal immigration, the first two things that happen is they think we're a bunch of criminals and they think we're a bunch of felons, right? And never mind that, two things. There was actually a time in this country when everybody was undocumented. It wasn't until 1790 that the US Congress and the US government said, oh, white people who have been in this country for more than 2 years can be citizens. And of course, you look at the Dred Scott decision, right, that said that free black people couldn't be citizens. You look at the Chinese Exclusion Act, right, that said that Chinese and Asian people could never be citizens, right? You look at, did you know that it wasn't until 1924 that Native Americans were given citizenship? I thought this was a joke. It wasn't until 1924 that the original Americans, who can actually claim to be Native Americans, were given citizenship and voting rights. That's not a joke, right? So you cannot divorce citizenship and immigration conversation from a racial class conversation. So we've been going around the country asking people, wait up, how do you define American? Why don't we start the question there? At the heart of SB 1070, the Arizona immigration law that's going to be here, the decision is going to be released from the Supreme Court later this month. says that that a cop can stop anybody whom they think to be is illegal. I'm sorry. What does quote-unquote illegal look like? And by the way, if you as a Filipino American is not helping Hispanic Americans and other Asian Americans and Black Americans try to gain and fulfill what being an American is and having independence, I mean, you're not being as late as you should be. We're all in this together. So in asking this question, we collected about 400 stories of people defining what an American is. And of course, celebrities are important, so we have,
I define American, I look in the mirror.
We have a great...
And action. The thing I like most about America is that it gives opportunity for all. There's a mindset here, amongst even the most successful, that everybody is welcome. The idea that if you come from the lowest areas, most difficult areas, and you survive, and you become great, and you become successful, you're accepted in with a badge of honor into the mainstream. And most countries have a bit of a caste system, whether they know it or not. And Americans, their consciousness is such that we accept people from all places.
So we're going to be adding more videos. I think we're going to get one from Jeremy Lin. I think we're going to have Lance Alongo, which is also awesome. But more than that, I want to transition to this question of Filipino Renaissance and what the definition of Renaissance is, at least to me. Sometimes, and by the way, as somebody who's also gay, I don't think young gay people honor our pioneers as much as we should. In the same way, I'm not certain that Filipino American, especially people, I'm 31, so I'm kind of older than you for the most part. I don't think we honor our elders as much as we should. The people that have had to fight the way that, people like, you guys heard Moira Lewis this morning? Moira Lewis fascinates the hell out of me. She is fascinating. This woman was the first Filipina to pass the New York bar without going to school in America. Can you imagine what she had to fight when she got here? People like her, and hermanos that fight the way that they do, they deserve a lot of credit. But to me, the definition of a Renaissance is also this transition that we're in. Because we are in transition. And so when I was asked to think about Renaissance, I instantly went to Carlos Bolosan. Do you know Carlos Bolosan?
Yeah. Yes.
Great. And this to me is a fascinating book. The book was published in 1946 from this quote, where this quote comes from. He said, "The old world is dying, but a new world is being born. It generates inspiration from the chaos that beats upon us all. The false grandeur and security, the unfulfilled promises and illusory power will charge the forces of our courage and determination." My favorite line, here it comes. "The old world will die, so that the new world will be born, with less sacrifice and agony." It's from a book called America is in the Heart. Probably one of the best pieces of memoir writing to come out of the 20th century. And I remember reading this when I was in high school, when a Pilipino American journalist said, "Here, you love all these other writers so much, why don't you get to know one of your own?" And Bolosan, she was the first Filipino to write for the New Yorker. So when I was working on my Mark Zuckerberg profile, it was in my head at that time. I had to believe that America is in the heart because I wasn't born here. I didn't have the papers. I wasn't privileged enough. For all of you who are, and who have that privilege, please use it. Because we need your help. So we're going to take some questions before I keep talking about this. Can you tell me where you're from, too? Great.
Hi, my name is Lolan Sevilla, and I'm with Filipinos for Rights and Empowerment and Gabriela USA. So I really appreciate the, the sort of movement we're in to redefine mainstream notions of like immigration and moving away from sort of the language of illegals and, just like the really derogatory, just like reframing the conversation.